Either I have a brother or I don't. To this day, I'm not sure. I suppose my first recollection of Billy occurred when I was about 4 or 5 years old. One day in late fall, I was playing in the living room, and my mother said,
"Nora, did you know you had a baby brother? He passed away a few years before you were born."
"What happened to him, Mama?"
"He contracted whooping cough, darling."
It was the 40s when he was supposedly born, so this was a fairly believable explanation. That wasn't the last time I heard about Billy. Every once in a while, my mother mentioned him in passing, especially when I was playing. Things like,
"You know, if Billy had lived, you would have an older brother like your girlfriend does.
or,
If only Billy was alive, you would have someone to play with."
I never really thought much about him at the time. I was little, and he became just one of the many stories I would hear off and on again. My mother loved to tell stories. However, as I grew older, I realized that my mother had a tendency to embellish her stories. She was Irish and, as I like to say, indulged in a wee bit of blarney. Eventually, I learned to take what she said with a grain of salt, especially when I saw that familiar glint in her eyes. After all, my mother insisted I had a brother, and there were no baby pictures, no cute baby blue blankets, nothing that would show me that he ever really existed. All I knew up to that point was,
His name was Billy, and he died when he was almost 2 from whooping cough.
the stories of Billy faded as I got older. My curiosity, however, did not. My parents got divorced when I was in my late teens, and my past quickly became something neither of them wanted to talk about. I realized I'd only ever heard my mother talk about Billy, never my father. One day I built up the courage to ask him about my older brother. At first he hesitated, a glint of sadness in his eyes. After a seemingly agonizing silence, he said,
I had been stationed in Hawaii when your mom gave birth to Billy. I was thrilled. As much as I love you and your sister, I had always wanted a son. I couldn't wait to get home and meet him. My son. As soon as I was given leave, I wrote to your mom telling her I was coming home to see her and our son. I arrived home a few weeks later and stopped by a store on the way to buy flowers for your mom and a little gift for Billy. I was beyond excited. As soon as I got home, I gave your mom and your sister a big hug and plenty of kisses. Then I asked to see Billy.
"And?"
Your mother said,
"You can't.
Why not?
He died suddenly, whooping cough."
What? Why didn't you tell me?
I didn't want you to have to read it off a piece of paper.
Where is he buried?
I can't tell you.
What? Dorothy, why can't you tell me? Dorothy, talk to me. What happened to my son? She refused to tell me. During the next few months, I would occasionally ask about him, but your mother would get terribly upset and carry on something awful. So after a while, I just stopped asking about him. Eventually, I came to believe that there never really was any baby after all.
I suppose one could argue that perhaps my mother, for some unknown reason, just told my father that he had a son. Maybe she was afraid of losing him or just wanted him to come home sooner. Maybe she made the whole thing up and that's why she couldn't tell my father where the grave was. It wasn't until after my mother's death that I again questioned Billy's existence. I was rummaging through her attic, reminiscing, when I found a couple of boxes of letters. They were letters my parents had written to each other while my father was deployed. There were hundreds of them. They were beautiful. Each one read like a history book with stories of the war and the life of a Marine who was far from home and the ones he loved. And they mentioned Billy.
Dorothy, how are you feeling today? I wish I could have been there when he was born. I can't wait to see him and hold him. Please tell him that Daddy loves him, and thank you, my love, for giving me a son. I love you. Give my love to Patsy, too, and tell her to help you with the baby.
It all proved that at some point my dad really believed he had a son. There were other letters, too. Ones my older sister Patsy had written to my father. She had to have been 11 or 12, definitely old enough to remember a baby being in the house.
"Billy likes to pull my hair and play peekaboo."
I could see my mom trying to deceive my father, but my sister? To this day, Patsy swears she had a little brother. None of the rest of my family at the time remember there ever being a baby. There is one slight problem. My sister is the only living person I know who remembers Billy, but she's not really herself anymore. She had a brain tumor removed and is on a lot of medications. She now tends to ramble on about all kinds of strange things. When I opened the other boxes in the attic, she became visibly shaken and screamed.
"You shouldn't have opened that box! That box is from Hawaii. You let out the Akulis. They are bad spirits from the island."
Later that same day, while we were eating in the dining room, she shouted,
"Look! Look up on the ceiling. It's the Akulis again. I told you you shouldn't have opened that box."
Years passed before I looked any deeper into the issue. Before I looked in the attic again. This time Patsy wasn't there. I found a box I hadn't noticed last time, one covered in beautiful wrapping paper. I opened it up to find a blue baby book. I opened that up and quickly leafed through it. There were a few entries about gifts the baby had received, but no names of the baby. I knew that mine and my sister's were pink and that they were at my house. I unwrapped something that was inside of a ball of tissue paper inside the box. I found a child's silver cup, and it was engraved. William Jr. Next to it was a faded picture of a baby wrapped in a blanket. There was nothing written on the back of the picture. Was it Billy? I thought of reasons why my mother would have done this. Then I found more letters. Letters that were not from my father. Letters that were definitely 18 plus. What if Billy hadn't been my father's son? But still, something happened to this baby. And my mother, being the religious and superstitious woman she was, would have buried the baby under his real name. Is that why she wouldn't show my father the birth or death certificate? Why she couldn't show him the baby's grave? It was years later, and I decided to ask my sister some more questions. She didn't want to talk about it, but I kept pleading with her, and she caved. Patsy said,
Mama told me the baby was really sick. Mama took Billy to the hospital, but she told me I couldn't come, but that they would be back. I sat on the front steps for hours. But he never did come back, did he? I remember Mama taking me to a cemetery that was high on a hill. That's where Billy is.
That's all she could remember. I spent years looking through records and newspapers, and I was able to decipher when Billy was born from my father's letters. October 1st, 1945. My daughter and I searched for nearby cemeteries. It had to be close because my mother never had a car. And the closest one had a hill, but no gravestone for baby Billy. A few months passed. I was driving around my hometown and glanced to my right, just happening to spot a cemetery on a hill. It was a decent hike from our house, but I instantly remembered my mother bringing me there as a young girl, claiming we were there to visit her aunts. But now that I'm older, I realize that all of her relatives were buried at the cemetery closest to our house. Why else would she spend half a day traveling to a random cemetery? Is Billy there?